This is a fraction review lesson. In this lesson, we will review how to add and subtract fractions. To simplify fractions, remember to divide by the greatest common factor. The factors for 10 and 15 have a common factor of 5, so we'll divide both the numerator and the denominator by the same number. And that gives us a fraction of 2/3 for an answer. So 10/15 is equivalent to 2/3. For 4/8, the greatest common factor is 4. Divide both the numerator and the denominator by the common factor to reduce 4/8 to 1/2. 8 and 12 have a common factor. It is 4. Divide the numerator and the denominator, and your answer is 2/3 in simplest form. Next, simplifying improper fractions. Remember that when you have an improper fraction, the numerator is greater than the denominator, so this will equal more than one whole. To convert it to a mixed number, you divide. 7 goes into 9 one time, and you have 2 left over, and that is your numerator, and the answer is 1 2/7. So 9/7 is made up of 7/7, which is the whole, plus 2 more sevenths, and the answer is 1 2/7. Remember to divide by the denominator, and the numerator goes inside the division house. 7 goes into 15 twice, using 14, leaving 1 left over. That's your numerator. The denominator always stays the same. And finally, 7 goes into 21 3 times evenly. In our next section, we'll work on adding fractions. When the denominators are the same, you will add the numerators and then simplify. The denominator stays the same. So 3/8 plus 1/8, you add the numerators, 3 plus 1, and the denominator stays the same. So the answer is 4/8. Remember to simplify your fraction as well. This step of writing out the numerator plus the numerator is not really necessary. You could do that step in your head. For the next problem, 3/7 plus 4/7, we add our numerators, 3 plus 4. That gives us 7/7. And remember that when your numerator and the denominator are the same number, then that is one whole. So 7/7 equals 1 whole. In the next section, we'll add fractions when the denominators are different. Rewrite the problem vertically. So let's take our 3/16, and below that we'll put our 1/8. Step 2, figure out the least common denominator by listing the multiples of each denominator. So we have denominators of 8 and 16. The multiples of 8 are 8 and 16. And I don't actually have to go any farther than that because I see that I have a common multiple. So we're going to rewrite the fractions using the common denominator. Now 3/16 is okay the way it is because it has the correct denominator. 1/8, we will rewrite that using a common denominator. So our multiplier is 2, and if you multiply the denominator by 2, you also need to multiply the numerator by 2. Now we can add our fractions. 3/16 plus 2/16 equals 5/16. Remember to check and make sure that your answer is in simplest form. For the next problem, we are adding 3/4 plus 7/8. I'm writing the fractions vertically because they need to be rewritten using a common denominator. Next, figure out the least common denominator. So we have multiples of 4 and multiples of 8. The multiples of 4 are 4, 8, and we don't actually have to go any further because 8 is the common factor. So 7/8 will be okay the way it is. Our multiplier is 2, so we multiply the numerator by 2 as well. Times 2 times 2 to get your new numerator. Remember to add your numerators. 6 plus 7 is 13, 13/8. This fraction does need to be simplified. 8 goes into 13 one time with 5 left over. And so the answer is 1 5/8. Next, subtracting fractions. Rewrite the fractions using a common denominator. Then subtract your numerators and then simplify. So our problem is 2/3 take away 1/6. We'll write the problem vertically because we're going to rewrite the fractions using a common denominator. And that was actually 2/3, so I'm going to rewrite that. That's 2/3 take away 1/6. The common denominator for 3 and 6, the multiples of 3 are 3, 6, and that will be our common denominator. So we'll rewrite 2/3. Multiplying by 2, this gives us 4/6. 4/6 take away 1/6. Then you're going to subtract our numerators. So we have 4 take away 1, that gives us 3/6. And finally simplify your fraction. And the answer is 1/2. So 2/3 take away 1/6 is 1/2. Next, 3/5 minus 3/10. 3/5 minus 3/10. You might want to pause the video and try this one on your own and then check your answer. Our common denominator is 10. Times 2 times 2, we get 6/10. Then we're going to take away 3/10. And 6 minus 3 is 3. So the answer is 3/10. Watch out for this common mistake when you're subtracting fractions or adding fractions. In this first problem, 3/5 plus 1/8, a student answered 4/13. This is incorrect. This student added the numerators and added the denominators, and that is not the correct way to add fractions. In the second problem, this student subtracted the numerators and then subtracted the denominators, and that is not the correct way to subtract fractions. For our next problem, we're going to subtract a fraction from 1. So we want to rewrite 1 as a fraction. So first, rewrite your problem vertically, and then you think, well, what fraction should I write it as? You want to write it using the denominator of the other fraction so that you don't have to rewrite with common denominators. So we'll rewrite our 1 as 5/5. Now 5/5 take away 3/5. Remember to subtract the numerators. So 5 minus 3 is 2, and the denominator stays the same. That tells you what size piece of fraction you're working with. Then you can always check to make sure that's right by adding the bottom 2 rows, and you should get the top row if it's correct. So let's go over how to check if it's correct. So we want to add these 2 fractions together to see if it's right. So you add 2 plus 3 is 5. So 2/5 plus 3/5 is 5/5. And that's just a way to double check to make sure your answer is correct. Continuing, we have 1 take away 3/8. You need to split up the 1 into a fraction. We'll split it up into eighths because that is the denominator of the other fraction. Now 8/8 take away 3/8. 8 take away 3 is 5. And the answer is 5/8. Your turn. Pause the video, try the problem. And the answer is 3/7. In this next section, subtract a fraction from a whole number greater than 1. So we will need to borrow 1 from the whole number. Then you'll write the 1 you borrowed as a fraction, you subtract the fractions, and then you subtract the whole numbers. So let's write the problem vertically. 6 minus 4/7. In order to take away 4/7, you need to borrow 1 and make it into sevenths. So when we borrow 1, we have 5 whole left, and that 1 that we're going to borrow as 7/7. That 1 that we're borrowing is equal to 7/7. Now we can subtract. So we have 7/7 take away 4/7 is 3/7. And then remember your whole number here. You had 5, take away nothing is 5. And the answer is 5 3/7. You can always check to make sure your answer is correct by adding your answer to the original subtrahend. So what I mean by that is you can take this answer, 5 3/7, and you add the original subtrahend, which was what you were subtracting. So 4/7 plus 3/7 is 7/7. 7/7 is 1. Add that to the 5, and you get 6. For the next problem, 4 take away 3/8. In order to take away 3/8, you need to make 1 into eighths. Borrow from the 4, it becomes a 3. That 1 that you borrowed, rewrite as a fraction, 8/8. Now subtract your fractions. 8/8 minus 3/8 is 5/8, and 3 take away nothing is 3. And the answer is 3 5/8. Your turn. Pause the video, solve the problem, and then check it. And the answer is 2 3/5. In this next section, subtracting a mixed number from a whole number, we're going to subtract 2 3/4 from 8. You will need to borrow from the whole numbers so that you have some fourths. So let's start. We're going to borrow from the whole number. And before we do that, let's write the problem vertically. We're going to borrow from the 8 and make it a 7. That 1 that we're going to borrow, we're going to borrow it as a fraction, and we're going to write it as fourths. A whole is 4/4. Now subtract your fractions. 4/4 take away 3/4 is 1/4. Now subtract your whole numbers. 7 minus 2 is 5. You can check to make sure this is the correct answer by adding these two numbers together, and they will give you the original number that you started with. So 3/4 plus 1/4 is 4/4, which is 1, and 1 plus 5 plus 2 equals the 8. So your answer is correct. In our next problem, write the problem vertically, 5 minus 2 3/8. In order to take away 3/8, you need to borrow 1 from the 5. When you borrow 1, that becomes a 4. When you write that 1 down, you write it as a fraction, 8/8. Now subtract your fractions. 8/8 minus 3/8 is 5/8. And 4 minus 2 is 2. The answer is 2 5/8. Remember to check your fraction answers. Sometimes they do need to be simplified. All right, it's your turn. Pause the video, solve the problem, and then check this answer. The answer is 1/3. When you're subtracting fractions, watch out for this common mistake. A student said that 8 minus 6 2/3 is 2 2/3. Why is this wrong? 8 minus 6 2/3. So what this student did is they subtracted 8 minus 6 and wrote down a 2, and then they just brought down the 2/3. That's not correct. When you're subtracting 6 2/3, you need to subtract the 6 and the 2/3. In order to subtract the 2/3, you need to borrow 1 from the 8 and make it a 7. Rewrite that 1 as thirds. 3/3 minus 2/3 is 1/3, and 7 minus 6 is 1. So you can see that that answer is incorrect. More practice adding and subtracting fractions. In this section, we're going to work on mixed numbers. So we'll take a look at our fractions, and we see that we have different denominators, so we will need to rewrite them using a common denominator. So the common denominator for 7 and 10. So you'll want to list the multiples, and remember that it needs to be a multiple of both numbers. So I'm going to actually list the multiples of 10, and when I find one that 7 divides evenly into, I know that that will be the correct answer. So I have 10, 20, 30, 40. Now 7 doesn't divide evenly into any of these numbers, so I know I haven't gotten to the answer yet. 50, 60, 70. Now I know that 7 divides evenly into 70, so that is the least common multiple. I could list all the multiples of 7 as well, showing that 70 is the least common multiple. So I'm going to rewrite this fraction using 70 as my common denominator. Times 7 to get an equivalent fraction, times 10 to get an equivalent fraction. I'm adding my fractions, so 10 plus 21 is 31/70ths, and 3 plus 2 is 5. Remember to check your fractions to see if they can be simplified. In our next example, 3 4/7 plus 5 6/7. Now these already have a common denominator, so we can start by adding our numerators. 4/7 plus 6/7 is 10/7, and 3 plus 5 is 8. Notice that the fraction is improper, meaning 10/7 is more than 1. So you want to convert that part to a mixed number. 7 goes into 10 once with 3 left over. Now add that to the 8. This is 8 plus 1 3/7, and the answer is 9 3/7. In our final example, we're subtracting and we have different denominators. So we want to know what is the least common multiple of 5 and 7. The multiples of 5, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and I haven't gotten to a number yet that divides by 7, so I keep going. 35, and there we go. If I list the multiples of 7, that's what I would come up with. 7, 14, 21, 28, 35. Some students are able to identify the least common multiple without writing out these steps, and that's fine. So our common multiple is 35. Our common multiple is also called our common denominator. Here, our multiplier is 7 times 7 times 7, and here our multiplier is 5 times 5 times 5 gives us 20. Add your numerators. Oh, wait, this is a subtracting problem. So we want to say, is it 7 minus 20? Is that 13? Well, you're subtracting a larger number from a smaller number. So what you want to do here is you want to borrow from this 2 and make it a 1. Borrow 35/35. Okay, that's the one that you're borrowing. Now you have 42/35. Now you can subtract 20/35. 42 minus 20 is 22/35. And 1 minus 1 is nothing. And so the answer is 22/35. So in that problem, we had to rewrite it with a common denominator, and then you can't take 20 pieces away from 7 pieces, so we needed to borrow one. We borrowed from the 2 and rewrote it as a 1. The 1 we borrowed as 35ths. So 7/35 plus 35/35 is 42/35. Then subtract your fractions. That's how you get your answer. All right, it's your turn. And this is an addition problem, so we'll do, take a look if you need to rewrite it with common denominators, solve the problem, and then pause the video to check the answer. So we have 7/5, 3, and that is equal to 4 2/5. For your last problem, pause the video, and the answer is 1 13/15. Now, for that one, we needed to rewrite with a common denominator, so we rewrote this as 1/5 is equal to 3/15. Then you cannot take 5 away from 3, so you borrow from the 4. That becomes a 3. The one that you borrowed is the 15/15. That gives you a total of 18/15. Now you can subtract. 18 minus 5 is 3. And I stand corrected. The answer is 1 3/15. In simplest form, that answer is 1 1/5. In this lesson that you have reviewed adding, subtracting, and simplifying fractions. Pause the video and solve the problem and then check it. Okay, so our common denominator is 15. Rewrite your fraction times 5 times 5 times 3 times 3. Now you want to subtract your fractions, but you cannot take 5 away from 3. So you need to borrow one whole. Borrow 1 from the 4, it becomes a 3. The one that you're borrowing is going to be 15/15. Add it to the 3/15 you already have. That gives you 18/15 minus 5/15. When you do the subtraction, remember to subtract the numerators. So 18 take away 5 is 13. 13/15. And then your whole numbers, 3 minus 2 is 1. And the answer is 1 13/15. In this lesson, you have reviewed adding, subtracting, and simplifying fractions.